All right, y'all, welcome in. Since we spoke last time, Georgia has scrimmaged. We heard from Todd Monken and Dell McGee. So we'll touch on all that right now, but I just want to go around the room right here, right now. Palmer and Jake, guys, how many days is it now? 17 as we record? 16? I'm
16.
losing count.
Day 16.
Once we get under 20, I mean, it doesn't even really matter anymore. It's basically 2 weeks away, and the Dogs are definitely in their season. So I'm fired up. I know you guys are too. Palmer, let's start with you. The scrimmage at Sanford Stadium. We heard a little bit about what went on there. We heard from Kirby after the scrimmage as well. Give me kind of the big picture, top takeaways that you gathered from what the Dogs did between the hedges.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think the big storyline of the day would be that the offense won the day. And Kirby backed that up, said that, and said that it wasn't too surprising to have that happen. And I think when you look at what Georgia brings back on the offensive side of the ball, what they don't bring back on the defensive side of the ball, it makes sense. He mentioned that tackling is always a concern in the first scrimmage because this is the first time you go live tackling, and that it's typically not pretty, and that it wasn't too pretty this Saturday. So I wrote about it on Saturday and said that I think it was a little bit of an eye-opening experience, a wake-up call, that this for Georgia's staff, seeing what they have in this offense, and that they may have to score some points with a defense that's going to be learning, growing, and developing as the season progresses. They're not going to be their best against Oregon. I think that I don't think you can expect Georgia to hold Oregon to 3 points like they did Clemson last year. I just don't know that they're going to have that defense to do that out of the gate, as opposed to last year. They had so much experience on that side of the ball. It was kind of an anomaly that they won that game with defense, and that they were able to do so much. That was definitely an outlier in college football, and Georgia returning back to normalcy a little bit here with an offense that is going to be really good and a defense that's going to be pretty good.
Jake, talking about the younger guys that you just covered, you wrote about the on-3 preseason freshman All-American. It's kind of a mouthful there, but Georgia does land two guys on that list, and they're both on the defensive side of the ball. So what the Dogs don't have in experience at some positions certainly seems like they still have a lot of talent. And like you said, Palmer, it's going to be tough out of the gates there against Oregon. But could you see, even by the end of the game, a couple big names step up defensively that are freshmen? Would you be surprised by that at all, Jake?
No, I really wouldn't. I think that those guys have a lot of opportunity, and if it comes down to a tight game, you probably want to lean on experience a little bit more. But if there's a little bit of room for error, I think that you will see those guys get a run, and I especially think that's true for Mykel Williams. I think that he's a guy who can.
Yeah, Mykel Williams and Malachi Starks. Forgot to mention their names there.
Yeah, I think that's especially true for Mykel Williams. I think that he's a guy who can affect the passer even at this young stage in his career. And that's, look, I mean, I think we all know that that's the state of college football right now is value on the pass rush. So if they feel that he's got a shot to get to the quarterback, or he's practicing that well still going into that game, I think that there's a definite chance there. Now, with safety, probably a little bit different. I think Kenny Dillingham probably take to the air a little bit with Bo Nix. Do you want a young guy on the back end that you want challenged, or do you lean toward a little bit more experience in a guy like Dan Jackson or Javon Bullard or any of the other guys that they have back there for safety? Malachi, to me, I'm not saying he's a liability. I just think that it's a little bit different when the band's playing.
Yeah, no doubt. How much, I'm curious to see, with Lanning being a first-time head coach, how prepared is he really? And I think the element of, he knows this defense, he knows Georgia because he worked there. I mean, those are always overblown storylines, but to a certain extent, I mean, it's not wrong. He does know what Georgia has and what it doesn't have on defense.
Yeah, and I think he knows the ways to challenge those guys. I think that that's really the key thing. Where does a guy like Dan Jackson struggle in coverage? Where does Kamari Lassiter, maybe lack? Is it in his back pedal? Is it off the line? Can you beat him off the line? I mean, I'm not knocking any of these guys or saying that's the case, but if anybody's going to know the intricacies of these guys' game, it's going to be Dan Lanning. So you have to hope that they've taken a big step forward since his departure for Oregon. And if that's the case, make it a little bit harder on him.
Well, Jake, and I'll hop in here.
No doubt.
Somebody that you haven't mentioned that he could know the faults of would be William Poole, and I think that's another position that Malachi could factor in at his star. In seeing some of practice here throughout the preseason, we've seen him working as a dime backer, meaning that a first team dime backer. So that means that he could be on the field. They could be in their plans with 6 defensive backs out on the field. Obviously working into that star position would be more of a nickel and 5 defensive backs on the field. I think it's a matter of time where they are waiting for. They obviously don't want William Poole to mess up, but they know that it could happen. They've seen that happen before, and they're preparing Malachi to be ready to step in there if they need it. He's somebody that we've heard a lot about this fall. Was around this spring, which is always helpful. Both those guys, Michael and Malachi, were both around this spring, so very helpful in terms of their development. And I think that both of those positions are positions of need. Always need depth in the secondary, especially at safety, where Georgia is losing Lewis Seen, is losing a couple guys to the transfer portal. They need that depth, and they certainly needed it at pass rush too with Michael.
Yeah, I think it's a situation though, at least from my point of view, where if you either got it or you don't a little bit with pass rush. I think that if you're skilled at that, that's something that translates over and can translate over early. Coverage in this league and against a team like Oregon, I think, can be a much bigger and much taller task to go up against. So, that's my hesitation. I think with Malachi is really just that experience factor. Whereas with Williams, I think that you got an opportunity there to say, hey, look, if this kid can get it done against this offensive line we've got and the multiple experienced guys up front that Georgia has. You got to feel good about his chances of getting it done on Saturday as well.
Looking at Oregon's offensive line, I mean, that's a group that is experienced. So Georgia can't just tee off. Kirby's mentioning that Robert Beal's having a quietly good camp. He had a quietly good season last year too. But Georgia's not just going to be able to tee off and hammer that offensive line all night long. So, yeah, I mean, that's an issue. It's an issue for sure. And Kirby doesn't, in his press conferences, he doesn't fudge things. If he says something, he's not exaggerating too much. He shoots from, he shoots us straight. And, his concerns about the depth at wide receiver, they're always going to be there. Concerns right now about depth at secondary, he always has them. It's just how concerned is Kirby really, and how bad is it in reality? That's what you really have to wait until the game to see. Because I don't think Kirby will ever be satisfied with his depth at those 2 positions. Speaking of the offensive side of the ball, before we get back to wide receivers for a minute, if Kirby's concerned about anything, it's those groups. But if he's really excited about anybody, it seems to be Kenny McIntosh, Palmer.
Yeah, as we talk about maybe a little bit of a depth concern, Georgia having Kendall Milton banged up this fall, dealing with a little bit of a hamstring injury, that opened the door for Kenny McIntosh to, take the reins of that number 1 running back spot and show out in the scrimmage. Had a long run that was featured in the Georgia football video on Twitter. Kirby told us about it, said that maybe he credits some of it to the offensive line, but either way, long run for McIntosh, certainly showing out early in camp. And I think that, that people outside of Georgia are noticing that too. Jesse Simonton wrote about it, our SEC writer for On3. Todd McShay had McIntosh as the number 33 player in his top 50 countdown for the 2023 NFL Draft. Certainly, McIntosh getting some hype, and I think folks are excited to see what he can do as he takes over, a heavier load in this offense. Has backed up Zamir White and James Cook, has been, kind of just a versatile player behind those two. Well, now with those two gone and maybe Milton dealing with a little bit of an injury, certainly a heavier load on McIntosh, and I think we'll get to see what he can do this fall.
I think that McShay note's important too, because I think that you don't typically think of running backs in this era as maybe that high up the board. I think that really speaks to the versatility of Kenny and the dynamic nature of his game. I was talking to somebody the other day. I think he compares very favorably to James Cook and probably has a step up on James in terms of his build. I think he's a little bit bigger and a little bit more built for the in-between tackling run. So I think that Kenny has that versatility, and I think in today's game, you're looking for ways to be dynamic. I think that's as important as anything that there is. I think he brings that element for Georgia, and I think that they'll rely on him heavily for that reason.
Palmer, from what you've seen and what you've heard, what is different about Darnell Washington this season? Did last season just boil down to his health concerns and Brock banging down the door and not looking back? Or has he also taken a step up in that tight end room?
Yeah, I think when you talk to Kirby about Darnell, the biggest thing is him being healthy, like you said, and in shape. When you're that big and you're carrying that much weight, you have to be able to stay out on the field long enough to make an impact. And I don't know that was a problem last year, but I don't think that he was in as good of shape then as he is now. In speaking with Kirby, like you said, dealt with a foot injury before last season. That was something that slowed him down and opened the door for Brock to come on strong, right out of the gate. Started the Clemson game, had a big showing against UAB, first touchdown, and it was a highlight one there. Like you said, I think that they saw what they had in Brock. They knew that they had something in him. They didn't know the extent of what they had in him until they were able to see it in the fall. And so that just meant that when Darnell was back, coming off of an injury, they knew what they had in Brock Bowers already. They were just going to continue to ride that as long as they could. But I think this fall, you've got, once again, Washington coming off of an injury, missed spring practice with also a foot injury that Kirby told us he suffered just before spring practice, and at that point, Washington was in some of the best shape that he had been in. We spoke to him earlier this spring. He said that he's feeling like he's almost back to that same shape. So, for me, I think that when you're that big and you're carrying that much weight, it's certainly important to be in shape. I think it's a lot of the same concerns that people have with Eric Gilbert coming back, is he going to be in good enough shape that he can be out there every play? That's not a concern with Brock Bowers. He showed it last year that he can be out there, and he's not quite as heavy as those other two. I think that when you've got somebody that big, it's important to be in shape, and Washington is certainly stepping up to that challenge.
On the second half of this podcast, I'm going to let y'all listen to everything Brock Bowers had to say at his first media availability, I guess, since last postseason, right, Palmer?
So we got to talk to Brock after he won National Freshman of the Year, but this is the first time that he has spoken specifically to Georgia media.
Okay. Well, I don't want to give away too much of that, but my biggest takeaway is that he dips his Zaxby's NIL chicken tenders in ketchup, which was incredibly disappointing to hear. I got to tell you, he's adapting to the South, but that's just not how you do it. You got to have some Zaxby sauce or something with a little bit more spice, a little bit more flavor. But other than that, I think it's working out for Brock. One last thing I wanted to touch on before we get into a quick recruiting note with Jake I upset some Alabama fans this week. We heard from Jermaine Burton, and, he spoke about his decision to transfer from Georgia to Alabama. He didn't really say much about it. He said it was a family decision. Big picture, I see what he's saying, but let's be real. I mean, he had more people in front of him catching passes, and, the writing was on the wall. He was hurt, couldn't stay on the field, and other guys took advantage of the opportunity. That's part of the equation. But, Georgia fans are laughing at the video I made. Alabama fans are mad about it. The whole point is it's a good situation for Jermaine, and that's it. It's not dogging on the kids, not sour grapes. Georgia, I think, even though Kirby's concerned about it, is okay with the receivers they have if they keep them healthy. And Bama just runs their offense a little bit differently. I mean, did y'all really think that press conference was that scandalous?
I certainly did not. I didn't think that there was much to it. I think that you probably assumed, everything that you may have learned from that press conference. The family decision. I mean, it's like we hear in recruiting all the time. I got to do what's best for my family. In this era, that can mean NIL deals. That can mean a chance to start. That can mean any number of things. And so I don't think that you really learned much from it. I think anybody who's being honest with themselves can probably admit that, the writing's on the wall. Alabama's had a couple 1,000-yard receivers here lately. Georgia's still waiting for the first one since Terrence Edwards. So, it's been a while. If you're a guy who wants to catch passes and values that, hey, go chase that. I think that that's the right thing to do. Meanwhile, if you're George Pickens, you can go in the second round of the NFL draft, be developed by some great coaches, and look like a potential offensive rookie of the year candidate early on in this season. So there's two schools of thought to this, and I don't begrudge the kid for doing what he did. If you want to catch passes, go catch passes, young man.
Yeah, everything that Jake just said there and more. Like he said, I don't know that we got any huge answers that we weren't expecting. You kind of expected to hear everything that he said in terms of this being a decision that he felt like was beneficial for him, for his family, and ultimately I tend to agree with him there that if, like Jake said, if you're trying to go catch passes, go to Alabama. If you're trying to win championships, stay at Georgia.
Yeah, and look, it worked out for George. Worked out really well for Pickens, even though he didn't have to put up those stats to do it. He put enough on tape, is an otherworldly talent, as we're finding out, even at the NFL level. So it happens in a million different ways for guys. And if that's what Burton felt like he needed to do to put more on tape, then he'll go do it, And he was impactful at Georgia. It's not overlooked that. He made big, impactful plays, explosive plays when they called upon him. Just wasn't the volume wasn't there, and I get it. Last thing for you, Jake, Keon Keeley decommits from Notre Dame. Big edge rusher. Georgia's in the list, in the hunt, in the mix here. What do you think the Dogs' chances are at testing the waters and potentially swaying him away from other guys, other schools like Florida, other schools like Bama?
Look, Georgia's going to make a run on Keon Keeley. There's no doubt about that. They should. I mean, you have to with a guy of this caliber. And like you said, they're on the list, so they probably got a puncher's chance. I tend to lean toward Alabama, but I think that there's a domino that this could affect, and that to me is Damon Wilson, who's another top edge rusher in this class, who's heavily considering both Georgia and Alabama. I think if Keeley ends up swaying the way of the Crimson Tide, I think that's beneficial for Georgia's chances with Damon Wilson, and that would be a huge, huge get for Georgia. Obviously a lot of what-ifs there, but I think that could be probably the biggest fallout from the Keon Keeley decommitment is perhaps Georgia sees an increased stock with Damon Wilson down the line if the Crimson Tide went out for Keeley.
Certainly something to watch. Appreciate that, Jake. One more note, guys, before we head to break here. Stetson Bennett on the cover of Sports Illustrated. I'm not going to even talk about the potential implications of that. Everyone saw the 2008 cover with Matthew Stafford I'm not even going to go there. But I do want to point out that he's wearing the new old school jersey on the front, and it looks pretty damn good. All right, guys, looking at 2 weeks until kickoff, Georgia and Oregon. I mean, we're beating the drum here at DawgsHQ. We have our 7-day free trial if you're not already a premium subscriber. You missed out on the $1 for a month and $10 for a year, I'm sorry to say, but we do appreciate you listening and invite you to see what we got going on over on the message boards. It's a lot of fun. Things are heating up. People are getting antsy over there too. We've seen, the volume of posts and people joining as we get closer is certainly just a buzz you can feel on that message board. It's a lot of fun and also a lot of premium insight from Palmer at practice, from Jake on the recruiting trail, and whatever the hell else I'm writing about. So go check that out. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, DawgsHQ, and obviously we're everywhere on social media as well. Guys, any final thoughts as we head into this weekend and get one Saturday closer to Georgia and Oregon?
I think for me, it's just about continuing to develop these young guys on defense. You're going to get a baptism by fire in game one. So, anything they can throw at these guys over the next couple of weeks, I know that they will. But that's, to me, the all-important thing is, can you have them ready for those West Coast skill guys, because they got some outstanding players out there at Oregon. Georgia's got outstanding players too, but can they do it when the lights are on?
Yeah, big scrimmage this Saturday, second one of the fall. They'll run another scrimmage next Saturday, but it'll be toned down for sure. More of a walkthrough of sorts to get a feel for what a Saturday will really look like in full. So this is really the final scrimmage of the fall in terms of the pads popping and stuff like that. So, you certainly want to see some of those guys that are taking steps forward, continue to take steps forward. And if you're going to do so, now's the time to do it. So lights at the end of the tunnel. Georgia, Oregon coming soon.
Dogs and Ducks, baby. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.